Tailwind CSS is not just hype. It speeds up your front-end development and makes styling web pages a great experience. Stay with me for the next 60 minutes to get started with Tailwind CSS and learn all the basics of this framework. We are going to build this cool conference landing page using Tailwind and learn things along the way. We'll also learn how to make it responsive. Once you build this along with me, you can build your next project confidently using Tailwind CSS. This video is sponsored by the Freelancer X community by Kyle Prinsloo. It's a completely free community for freelance web designers and developers. Kyle has been a freelancer for 7 years now with a 6-figure income. He's written multiple books and helped hundreds of freelancers grow their career. In this community, you can get one-on-one help from Kyle himself and many other successful freelancers. You get to network with other freelancers in the monthly calls. You can get your work reviewed by other members and get genuine feedback too. You even get a chance to win $250 every month by building something using Editor X. So if you're a freelancer or aspiring to become one, I highly recommend joining me along with 900 other devs on Freelancer X right away. Now let's go. First of all, what is Tailwind CSS? I'll directly show you in the playground here. Go to Docs, Playground, and let me remove all of this here. I'll add a single div and some text. What is Tailwind CSS? In simple words, Tailwind is a CSS framework that is packed with thousands of class names like text white for white color text, BG black for a black background, P6 for some amount of padding on all sides. You can see padding 1.5 rem here. Shadow LG for a large shadow. Rotate 3 to rotate it slightly, and so on. All of these can be combined together to design any web page without ever leaving your HTML file. So you don't need to create a style sheet. This is there for a different reason, which you'll understand soon, but you don't need to give class names like card or header and then go to your CSS file, use the selector and define your styles. So without switching between HTML and CSS, staying in HTML and designing everything saves a lot of time. Now, all these utility classes we just added were immediately converted to regular CSS by Tailwind. You can see them here for reference. Scroll down, and there you can see rotate 3, BG black, P6 and everything that we just added. But we don't need to worry about them at all. Tailwind generates this automatically. Now, if you're not very sure of using Tailwind in your project, before going through the long process of installing it, you can simply come to this playground, play.tailwindcss.com, try out the utility classes and maybe even build some components. And then if you feel like it's for you, you can go ahead and install it. I'll also do the same right now. Before installing, let's get a taste of Tailwind CSS by building this part of our website right here in the playground itself. So we have 2 divs within an outer div. So let's add that div. Inside that we have 2 more divs. The top div has a violet background, class BG violet. Now you can see Tailwind CSS has auto-suggested the class names BG violet 50, 100, 200 and so on up to 900. This is how the color system in Tailwind is. If you go to the docs, I'll keep the docs handy because we will keep referring to them time to time. Here, if you search for default color palette, you can see a huge list of default colors available to use readily. This consists about 22 main colors with each color having 10 different shades. The lightest shade of violet, for example, would be violet 50 and the darkest shade would be violet 900. We can use these colors for backgrounds, text, borders and so on. Apart from these 220 colors, of course, we have white, black and transparent values. So coming back, here the color we need is violet 400. You can't see anything yet because there is nothing in this div. So let's add some padding. That is p hyphen number. It starts from P0, there is P1 for 0.25 rem of padding, P2 for 0.5 rem, P3, P4, P5 and so on up to P96. But of course, you can see that some numbers are missing in between like P13, P15, 17 and so on. That's because it's very rare that you would add a padding of, say 3.75 rem, which would be P15. You can still add a padding of 3.75 rem, though it's not available in these utility classes, but that's something I'll show you later. For now, a padding of 2 rem should be sufficient, which is P8. Now this div is sticking to the edges, so just to make it easier for us to see the div clearly, let me wrap this within a section and give some padding to the section, say P4, 1 rem padding, so we're able to see this div. Alright, within this top div, we have a mail icon. I use hero icons whenever I use Tailwind CSS, that is by the creators of Tailwind itself. So go to heroicons.com, let me search for mail. Yeah, here it is. I want the solid version. So go here, copy SVG and paste it within the first div. Great. Now notice that this SVG also has some utility classes. H6 means height 1.5 rem and W6 means width of 1.5 rem. Initially, these numbers like P8, H6, all of these might seem very cryptic, but as you start using them more often, you'll get a hang of it. One thing to understand here is that these numbers are not random. Let me show you in the docs. I'll close hero icons and in the docs, search for spacing scale, default spacing scale. And here you can see these numbers or values like 0, px, 0.5, 1 and so on are used for width, heights, padding and margin. 0 obviously means 0 pixels. Px is for 1 pixel. After that, 0.5 is 0.125 rem or 2 pixels and then 1 is 4 pixels and so on. So if you usually design using pixels on your mind, if you want a width of say 20 pixels, divide that by 4 and that's 5. So W5 would be the width. On the other hand, if you usually use rems, if you need a padding of 2 rem, multiply 2 by 4 and that would be P8. Right, so if you're using pixels, divide this value by 4. If you're using rem, multiply the value by 4 and you get this value. But you can always come back and refer to the documentation whenever you need. Let's say, just search for fixed widths and you will know what to use here. You can refer to that. Now coming back, this SVG icon has a height and width of 1.5 rem. Looking at our final design, it looks like we need double the size. So let's change this to H12 and W12. Great. And now you see that the fill is current color. So let's not change this. Let's not change the color of SVG within this. Instead, let's add a text color of white to this using text white. Great. Now we need this icon at the center of the div. If you're familiar with CSS grid layout, to center a div, we can use display grid to the parent container. So that would just be grid in Tailwind. And then we use place items center in CSS. That's again place items center this way. I have an entire tutorial on CSS grid with Tailwind CSS. It's one of the most watched videos on my channel, so you can refer to that video once you've started using Tailwind in your projects. Next, in the lower div here, we have a paragraph and then a form with input and button. Let's add the paragraph first. P, get notified of all the updates. This whole div needs a little padding, so let me add P10 here. And it's also white in color, so we can add BG white either to this div or we can add BG white to the parent div itself. Let me add it to the parent div here. And while we are doing that, let's also add the shadow and rounded corners. So for shadow, the utility class is shadow hyphen SM, MD, LG, XL, and so on, depending on the size of the shadow you need. Shadow XL would be perfect for us. And look at this. Look at the amount of CSS you had to write if you had to add a simple shadow this way, and Tailwind makes it so easy. You can simply add a utility class. Okay, now for rounded corners, we can use the utility class rounded, again SM, MD, LG, and so on. Even rounded full, which adds, if you need a circle, you can use rounded full. So for us, again, rounded LG would be great. Notice that we got rounded corners at the bottom but not at the top because we've added a background color to this div. You'll have to add rounded corners to this div itself. So let's say rounded LG here, but that gives us rounded corners on the bottom. So to add rounded corners only at the top, you can say rounded T LG, where T is for top. So similarly, you can add rounded corners only on the left by doing rounded L. You see there are no, the right side is not rounded, or you can do rounded L, rounded B, and so on. Again, this is more readable in my opinion. So rounded T, LG for now. Next, let's add the form. Input type equals email, and then button notify me. Placeholder email address. Did you observe something? The default browser styles for input and button are gone. Otherwise, we would see a gray button here, right? And you would see some border for the input. Now, removing these styles are intentional. Tailwind CSS has some base styles which resets most of the styles browsers apply and also adds some opinionated CSS. You can learn more about what styles are added and removed in the talks. You can search for pre-flight, and this will give you an idea of the base styles that are applied. Now let's style our input and button from scratch. Let me refer to the mobile version of this because we will be designing mobile first. We have the input field first, and below that comes the button. So let's use Flexbox with flex direction column to place them one below the other. So that would be class flex, just flex for display flex, and for flex direction column, it's flex col. Now for the input, let's add some border. By just saying border class, this adds a 1 pixel border. And then we need to set the border color. So we can say border and then mention the color. Let's use a shade of gray, border gray 300. Let's add a padding. I want a different horizontal and vertical padding. So for horizontal padding, it's px because x in the x direction. And then you can select the size. This will be the same. Let's say px4. And then the vertical direction padding is py. I'd need like py2. We also need rounded corners for the input, so rounded MD would do here. You see how quicker it is to style form elements using Tailwind? And the best part is you can even add the hover and focus styles right here. Using the hover : modifier, this is called the hover modifier, and then you add your utility class, so that will act upon hover. Let's change the border color on hover to border violet 400. You see on hover, now we have border violet 400. And similarly for focus, let's first remove this outline. Focus, outline none, and then focus again, border violet 500. You have to use this modifier for every single utility class. There's no way of combining these two with a single focus modifier yet. So the input is done. Next, let's style the button. Button class, we need a background BG violet 400. Same horizontal and vertical padding. So px4, py2. I need rounded corners, rounded MD. We need a text white. And the text appears to be slightly bold here. Of course, the font is different. We will get to that. So font weight, semi-bold we need. So that would be font semi-bold. And that's done. It surely takes some practice to remember these class names, but once you start remembering, you can feel the speed. Now this looks perfect. You might have started to feel that the HTML is getting too cluttered. There are too many class names and your code is getting unreadable. Initially, everyone feels the same. Slowly, you'll get used to it. Now let's add some gap between all these three elements. For these two elements, you can add a gap in Flexbox using the gap utilities. So gap of 3 would do. And for the form itself, to add a margin at the top, let's use margin top, which is M for margin and T for top, margin top of 3. Great. And that's it. This entire component is done except for the font family and this text color. Those are general styles that we'll add to the overall project, so we do that later. This is wonderful, isn't it? We've built an entire component without leaving the HTML file at all. I hope you're liking it so far, and you might have already realized that you need a good enough knowledge of regular CSS to use Tailwind CSS. So if you don't have a good foundation, I suggest practicing regular CSS a little more before you jump into Tailwind. Alright, now that you know what Tailwind CSS can do and how powerful it is, I'm sure you're excited to install this in a brand new project. Let's start with a completely blank project. Create a new folder, frontconf, cd into frontconf, and open this up in Visual Studio Code by typing code space dot. I recommend using VS Code because you get an extension with VS Code that auto-completes Tailwind CSS classes just like you saw in the playground. First, create a public folder. Within this, create index.html. This public folder is where we like to have all the HTML, CSS, and if you have any JS files. Add a skeletal structure to index.html, change the title to frontconf. Now let's install Tailwind CSS. Go to the docs and go to installation. There are multiple ways to install Tailwind CSS. I have a complete tutorial on all the different ways and the pros and cons. That video is linked above so you can watch that in detail. If you're going to use a framework like Next.js or Laravel or a tool like Vite, you can follow the respective guides for installation. But right now we're not using any framework, so we'll use Tailwind CLI, which is the simplest way to install. For this, you need to have Node and npm installed on your system. You can install without Node 2 using the standalone executable, but this is easier, so I would go ahead with npm. If you're not sure if you have npm installed, go to the terminal. I'll open a new terminal within VS Code itself. You can run npm-v. If you see a version number like this, that means npm is installed. If not, you can go to node.js.org and install Node. npm will also be installed along with it. Once you have npm, initialize the project with npm init and a -y option for default values. Back to Tailwind docs. The first step is to install Tailwind CSS using this command. So npm install -d. This installs Tailwind CSS as a dev dependency. Alright, Tailwind CSS is now installed. You can check package.json file. You'll see that the latest version of Tailwind CSS is 3.2.4 as on recording this video, so you will get the latest version. Next, run npx tailwind css init. This command will create the default configuration file you can see here, tailwind.config.js. Once done, the next step is to configure your template paths. What this means is, here within content, you need to add the paths for all the files where you wish to use the Tailwind CSS class names. Since we're going to have all our HTML files within the public directory, all our utility classes will be within that. So we can add a path to public directory /public slash star star in case we add some folders within that, or even if we don't, slash star.html. If you also have JS files within it or any other extension files, then you can add those extensions this way. Otherwise, you can just leave it as star.html. Now, a lot of beginners go wrong at this step. It's very important to get this path right because Tailwind CSS looks only into those files mentioned in this path, searches for the utility class names, and using those, it builds the actual CSS for us. So this path has to contain all the HTML files or whichever files like I mentioned that has your Tailwind utility class names. Otherwise, Tailwind will not build those class names and so those styles will not work as expected. Right? Next, create a CSS file that is your input.css. Now you see that the path here is src, but I am using a public. So it's quite different from the docs. Either follow this tutorial completely or follow the docs, otherwise you'll get confused. I'll be adding it directly in the root of this folder, input.css. You can name it whatever you want. I'll call it input.css. Now this is where you add these three directives: Tailwind base, Tailwind components, and Tailwind utilities. What are these? Tailwind CSS uses this input file to build the final CSS. Tailwind will convert this line, Tailwind base, to all the base styles, the pre-flight CSS that we saw before. We need these utility and components layers too for Tailwind to perform correctly. Now we need to run a command to make Tailwind CSS build the styles using this input. So clear this, type npx tailwind css -i dot slash input.css. That means take the input file in the root of the project. This means -i means input, and output this to ./public /css /styles.css. Yes, this file does not exist yet. This is what will be created by Tailwind, and this is our final CSS file which we can use along with HTML. Now run this command. You now see that the CSS folder has been created and there is styles.css with all the base styles already added, right? Do not edit this file because it will be rewritten every time Tailwind CSS builds. So close this, and if you need to add any custom CSS, you have to do that in this input.css below these directives. We'll see how to do that as well. Now here's a warning. No utility classes were detected in your source files. That's because we haven't added any utility classes yet in index.html. It's time to copy that HTML code we wrote in the playground and paste here. So go back to that, copy everything and paste it within body. One last step is to link this output file styles.css within the HTML. So link css /styles.css. That should be it. Run the same command once again. No warning this time. So open this up with live server. If everything worked fine, you should be able to see something like this. This means Tailwind CSS is installed and working correctly. Back to VS Code. Instead of running this command each time manually, we can add a watch flag at the end like so. With this, Tailwind will watch the files for changes and build automatically. Also, instead of typing this huge command every time you open this project, we can create a script in package.json file. Change this to build or dev, you can call it whatever, and paste this command here. Now, instead of typing this command, you can just run npm run build. And now the command is running in the background. We can make changes. It will automatically build. All right, let me close all of these and continue. So let's first limit the width of this div. Coming back, remove the padding for this section. And let's limit the width of the div by using max width. And you can use values like SM, MD, LG, and so on. You can see what each of them means. So let me add a max width of LG here. That should be fine. Let's see. All right. Now, if you noticed, I was able to get these auto suggestions, all of these, because I have the extension. Let me show you. View extensions, Tailwind CSS, Tailwind CSS IntelliSense extension. You should install it right away. Coming back to the browser, view this in responsive mode. Let's now work on the rest of the landing page. We can see that there is padding on the left and right. So let's wrap the whole of the page within a section, another section. And this, I can minimize it for now. Wrap this and add some horizontal padding, px8. So that would add a left and right padding of 2 rem. And let's also limit the whole screen width using maxed width. You can use any of these values, but we need a very wide value, and that would be with maxed width screen utility classes. So let's use max width screen 2XL. This limits the width of the page to 1536 pixels in case of very, very large widescreen desktops. Let's also add a min height of screen that adds a minimum height of 100 viewport so that the page occupies full height of the viewport. This is needed for desktop layout. Next, within this section comes the header with the logo. Within that, an anchor tag and then the image. I have the logo within images folder right here. So you can copy the same image if you need from the GitHub repository linked in the description below. So image src images / logo.png. Let me give it a height of h7, which is about 28 pixels. All right. So we have our logo here. We need some vertical padding in the header. So that would be header class py8. Great. Now let's add this section with a heading and 2 paragraphs. Go back. Let me add some comments to differentiate the sections. This would be subscribe section begins, and we can close this. Subscribe section ends. And now let's add the section for description. So copy the same thing. Description section begins and description section ends. Great, this is better. First we have the heading and then 2 paragraphs. Let me copy and paste those text. This is the heading. This is the first paragraph and the second paragraph. All right. Firstly, we have a huge top and bottom padding for this entire section. So let's add that. Section class py for vertical padding. This could be about 12. Right. Now you can see that all these 3 elements look alike. So h1 is not different from the paragraphs. That's again because of the base styles added by Tailwind CSS. There is no additional padding, margin, none of that. So it's set to 0. You can start from scratch. So h1 has a semi-bold font weight. Let's add h1 class font semi-bold, and this is a very large text. To increase the font size, you can use the text utility classes, and then there are values like SM, MD, XS for too small, and then there is LG, XL, 2XL, XL, 2XL, and so on. This would probably be 6XL. Let's see. Refresh. Yeah, that's about it. But we need to change the font family first. The font family used here is Fira Sans, so you can grab that from Google Fonts. Go to fonts.google.com, search for Fira Sans and add the regular and semi-bold font weights, and then copy the import statement from here, and you can paste it in the input.css input file before all of these directives at the top like this. Great, we've imported the font, but how do we include it? You can do it with regular CSS itself. You can add body here and then say font family, Fira Sans, sans serif. But only thing is, when you add custom CSS in Tailwind like this, you need to add them within any of these layers using the layer directive. Since this is a base style, that is, it applies to the entire layout, all the pages, you can add it within the base layer. But if you're adding some custom styles for any components like button components or model or card or anything, you can add them within layer components. Or if you're adding any custom utilities, you can add them within the utility layer. It's okay if you don't get the layer right, because usually it works fine. It's just for ordering the CSS in the final CSS file. That's why these layers are meant. So it's okay if you don't get this value right, but you have to add it within a layer. Otherwise, these will not be considered. So now let's see if this worked and refresh. Yes, we have Fira Sans. This is the same font that we need. So this is one of the ways of adding a custom font. Something else we could do is change the font in the config itself. Go to the docs and search for font family. Tailwind gives 3 utility classes, like you can see: font sans, font serif, and font mono. The default is font sans, which is applied to the HTML. And this is the default sans font that is used. To customize this, you can go to customizing the default font here, and this is how it's done. Copy these lines, font family, and add it within the extend block within theme. So you're extending the default theme and changing the font sans utility value. So here you can change this to Fira Sans, and you also need to copy this line from here for the default theme and paste it here. So now it uses Fira Sans, and using the spread operator, it includes all the other font families, the default ones. So in case your browser fails to load this font, then the default one is used. Now you just learned one of the most important concepts in Tailwind CSS: customizing the default configuration. Here we customize the default font family. You can customize everything in Tailwind CSS. Let me show you. Let's say we want to use some brand colors instead of the default ones provided in the default color palette. So that can be done by adding colors. And let's say you want to call it primary. You can call it blue, green. You can override the existing ones using the same names. But if you want to say call it primary, you can give it a value here, something like, yeah. And now use this color anywhere in your HTML. Say, for example, now you can say text primary, and that color appears. Notice how the Tailwind CSS IntelliSense extension also picked up the configured color, right? You can say text primary, you can say BG primary, you can say border primary. All of that will now work. Now, not just colors, you can also customize the spacing scale itself. Now, earlier we saw that the spacing 13 was missing, which was 3.25 rem. So you can add that using spacing, or if you particularly want that 3.25 rem only for height, you can even just say height and say 13, 3.25 rem. And now you can add that to any of your elements. Earlier, H13 was not available, but now because you've customized it, you can use H13. You can add any other value here, like height of logo or something. So you can simply use H logo here. Sorry, I haven't saved it. Yeah, you can say H logo and you can use. So this value can be completely customized. All right, so let me remove all of these. I just wanted to show you how powerful customization is, and remove this as well. And now we can also remove this block here because we've customized the default sans itself. But instead of removing it, let me comment it out because we might want to use this later. All right, we just saw how to customize and add some utility classes that are not available. But let's say this H13 that we just added, you just needed it probably for a one-time usage. Then you wouldn't want to add it in the configuration file. You just want to use it once. How do we do it then? Or even this text color, text primary, it might not be primary. You just want to use that color once somewhere on your page. Instead of customizing in your config file, what you can then do is use something called as arbitrary values. So let's say you do text and then use square brackets like this and use that same color here, this way. You see, this has immediately added this particular color and you can use it. Let's test. You see, this color has now appeared. This is very similar to adding inline styles where you can quickly add some styles, but definitely this is way more powerful than that because you can even use it using the hover or focus variants, and there are more benefits to this as well. This is awesome. Now let's get back and complete our mobile layout. I will remove this. All right. So now the font family and font size is perfect, but we need a larger line height. For line height, the utility class is leading, and you can use it with a number like 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. Or you can even use words like tight, snug, normal, relaxed, loose. For us, what we need here is about 1.25. So leading, tight will do it. Great. Next is this element. We need a little margin top, change of color, and increase in font size. So that would be class empty margin top of, I think 2 should be good. And then we need text violet 500, and then a larger text, so text LG or text XL. Refresh. Yeah. One thing you might notice is these fonts are slightly thicker than this. That's because of font smoothing. I always like to use this one class to body, that is anti-aliased or whatever it's called. It just makes the font smoothing anti-aliased. I have absolutely no idea what this does, but I know that the fonts look great when I add this class. So I add it, and now you see this is perfect. All right, now this paragraph, let me add a margin top again, MT3, and then text LG. All right. Only thing is the color here. The margin is also slightly bigger, MT4, and we can add a gray color, or I have used slate here. You can add text slate 600 to this paragraph, or you can add this directly to the body itself because all the other paragraphs used in this page are of the similar color. All right. Great. Now this color needs to be changed. So H1 text slate 800. And that's it. Now we need some more gap between these two elements, and we can add margin top to this, but instead let's use Flexbox and add gap, because for desktop layout anyway we need Flexbox to display these two elements next to each other, right? So wrap these two sections this one and this section within another section, which will make the flex container. So class flex, flex call in mobile layout, and we need a gap, say about 20. And then let's add this padding directly to this section now, right? So let's remove this. Okay, this should work. Yeah, we have a gap which is exactly as this. Now time to add the footer. We'll work on this violet background towards the end. So add the footer right here below the section, footer, UL, LI, A, and the first one is about us. Then we have contact, and then we have privacy policy. Let me use Flexbox to display all three next to each other. So make the UL a flex container, UL class flex with a gap of about maybe 1.5 rem, so that's 6. And we need slightly smaller text, so text SM, and lighter text too, so that would be text slate, I think 500 or 400. Okay. Okay, yeah, this is different for mobile layout. We have a white background because, we have a white text because of violet background, but here you'll see that, yeah, this is what it is. We just need some padding, vertical padding for the footer. So here as well, we add by8. All right, perfect. We have our mobile site fully ready except for this background, like I said. Now comes a huge task, making this responsive. Now let's see how Tailwind makes this super quick. Even this can be done without leaving the HTML at all. Now look at this layout. Until about 1024 pixels, the layout remains the same. After the breakpoint of 1024, the flex direction of the section needs to change from column to row. So this here, flex call, needs to become flex row after a breakpoint of 1024 pixels. In Tailwind, you can do this using modifiers like SM or MD, LG, XL, and so on. So if you add LG, you notice that this adds a media query at media min width 1024 pixels, which is why we need to use the mobile first approach. If you first add flex row, there is no way you can then change it to flex call in mobile. But these are the utility classes considered for mobile, and then for desktop, that is beyond a certain breakpoint, like for a small screen like 640 pixels, beyond 640 pixels, you can add your utility classes here. Now beyond LG breakpoint, we need this direction to change to flex row. So similar to using hover and focus styles, we say LG flex row. So this is what has been added, that is min width 1024 pixels, and this particular section, flex direction row, is the rule added. Let's check. Up to 1024, it remains the same, and then great, we have the direction changed to row. Now we need both these sections to occupy 50% each, or the same width. In regular CSS, you would add flex 1 to each of these elements. So let's do the same here as well. Flex 1 is the utility class that does the same thing. Here also it's flex 1. Great. Also, for a wider screen like this, there is more horizontal padding starting from about 768 breakpoint. That is the MD breakpoint. So at that breakpoint, for this wrapper section, let's add a greater horizontal padding, which is about px 16. Right, that's good. Also, for the flex container, this vertical padding needs to be increased at the same breakpoint, which is here. So md py, I think about 20 should be good. Perfect. All right, let's see what else. Okay, there's one thing. For larger screens, this input and button are next to each other. Let's see at what breakpoint that changes. For screens above about 630 pixels, that changes to next to each other. In Tailwind, that is SM breakpoint. So within the subscribe section, we have flex call. So above SM breakpoint, change that to flex row. Let's see. Great. We also need to remove the gap here. So SM gap 0. Notice how we are adding these two classes flex call and gap 3 for the mobile layout, and then for slightly larger screens we are resetting it to flex row and gap 0. Actually, flex row is the default and gap 0 is also the default. Only for the mobile we are changing it to flex call and gap 3. So in cases like these, where you're resetting the default at a higher breakpoint, instead of adding 4 utility classes this way, or instead of adding flex call and SM flex row, you can just say max SM, that is until SM, use flex call. So after that, it will automatically reset to whatever is the default, which is flex row. So you can see here, this not keyword is used to make sure that until the width of 640 pixels, flex direction is column. If this is too confusing, just use whatever we did before. This was very recently introduced in Tailwind version 3.2. So if you're using a lower version, again, this will not work. So here as well, instead of gap 3 and SM gap 0, you can just say max SM gap 3 and remove this. Like I said, you can totally use whatever we did before as well. I find this smaller, so I'm going to use this. Even in this case, flex call and LG flex row, instead of doing this, I would say max LG flex call, and flex row is default anyway after that. All right, coming back to the input and button, we need to extend this input text to occupy as much space as possible, making this entire row occupy full width, and that can be done using flex grow. You can set flex grow 1 to the input, and in Tailwind you can just say flex grow. That's it. Flex grow sets flex grow to 1. The other value is 0, which is the default. I have a complete tutorial on Flexbox utility classes as well using Tailwind CSS, so you can go through that. That will be extremely helpful for you. One last thing is we need to remove the rounded corners on the right for the input and on the left for the button. For that, above SM breakpoint only, rounded are none. So we are saying rounded corners on the right, none for the input, and here you can say rounded L, none. Refresh. Yeah, that is perfect. Let's verify again for mobiles. Yes, we have rounded corners, we have the gap and everything, and then for larger screens, this is perfect. Great. Now for desktop layouts, notice that the footer is floating. That's not what we want. To keep the footer at the bottom, you can add Flexbox to the wrapper section and using flex direction column as well. So here, not here, the wrapper section is this one. We can say flex call, and then for the footer, you can just say empty auto. Now this is a neat Flexbox trick. I've covered this also in the tutorial. So now this footer stays at the bottom because these three are now flex items, and we can add margin top auto to any element to push it to the extreme end. So that's about it. The only thing pending is to add this violet background now. I recently figured out that this can be done using background gradient. So time to add some custom CSS now. Go to input.css, uncomment this, and instead of font family, background, linear gradient to bottom. So because we are going to do the mobile styles first, from top to bottom, starts with white at 0%, and it's white itself until about 60%. And then it's violet, right? It's violet from 60%, and then it's violet itself until 100%. But this is not the violet color that we need. We need the violet 500 from Tailwind configuration. So how do we get that? Do you have to copy the hex code? Not needed. You can use the theme function of Tailwind to access any of the default theme values or the ones that you have customized. So using theme, just say colors dot violet dot any of the colors. Now it's not violet hyphen 500. You can't use hyphen here. You'll need to use dot. And the same thing you can copy and paste here as well. Let's see. Yeah, so this has been added. We need this in the mobile layout. Now that we have the violet background, let's change this color to white. So for mobile, the footer text needs to be white. So that's here. So for mobile, it needs to be text white, and above LG breakpoint, where the violet background is on the right, we need text slate 400. So it is LG breakpoint, right? Oh yeah, we need to change that. Right, so here in the custom CSS, don't worry about these errors. They're actually not a problem. Now above the breakpoint of 1024 pixels, for that we need to add media queries. But instead of saying media and min width 1024 pixels, instead of writing this one manually, you can use the screen function. So instead of this, just say media screen LG. So you don't have to manually remember 1024 pixels, 768 or any of that. And also, in case you customize these breakpoints, you can start using those values as well. So media screen LG, copy this, paste it, and here instead of to bottom, it's to right. Let's check. Yeah, great, fantastic. Here it is to the bottom and here it is to the right. So that's wonderful. Now our landing page is complete. If you have come this far, take a moment to appreciate yourself. This is a lot. Go ahead, create your own project now using Tailwind CSS and you will learn a lot more. If you want to minify the final CSS that we have, this one, you can use the minify flag. So we can have another production script. And you can copy this, paste it, and instead of watch flag, you can add a minify flag for production. And then you can stop this and instead say npm run prod. And now you'll see that all your styles are minified. So use the build script for development and then prod script for production. Let's see if everything still remains the same. Yes, it does. Nothing has changed. Now to host this project, simply upload the contents within the public folder and you're done. You don't need anything else. This full project is on GitHub. The link is in the description below. Check out if you need any help. Let me know if you have any questions at all in the comments below. Would also love to know if you enjoyed this course.
Thank you for watching. Hit a like and share this video ahead. If you enjoyed watching this, don't forget to subscribe below and turn on the notifications so you won't miss a single video from Tyrus.